Good morning, everybody. Welcome. If we could please start with the first item on the agenda, which is the appointment of the chairman. Do we have any nominations?
Yes, I'd like to propose Councillor Townsend.
I'd like to second Councillor Townsend.
Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. Councillor Townsend.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your punctual attendance, and I'm glad you all managed to get here. Do we have any apologies for absence?
No apologies, Chair.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome. Please can I remind all participants to use their microphones when they're speaking in order that everyone can be heard and the webcast can pick up whatever we're saying. Are there any declarations of interest? Okay, that is duly noted. Thank you. Can I draw your attention to the summary of procedure for this hearing, which can be found at pages 5 to 11 of the agenda pack? Do you all have that?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. This application is for a variation of the premises licence for the Old Bell, 38 Bell Street, Sawbridgeworth, Hertfordshire. Item reference 24/0207/PLV. Pages 12 to 54 of the agenda pack. Firstly, if we can begin with some introductions. Myself, I'm Councillor Richard Townsend, Bishop Stortford, and my colleagues here, if you'd like to introduce yourselves, please.
I'm Councillor Maura Connolly from Hertford at Kingsmead.
And good morning, I'm Vicky Smith, Councillor for Hertford Benjoe.
I'm Michelle Aves, Committee Support Officer.
Morning, I'm Dimple Ruchan, Legal Advisor.
Morning, I'm Oliver Rawlings, the Service Manager of Licensing and Enforcement.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. Could our applicants please introduce yourselves?
Good morning, Chair. My name's Piers Warren from TLT Solicitors, and I represent the applicants here today.
Thank you very much. And you, sir?
Good morning. My name is Darren Grover. I'm the leaseholder for the Old Bell in Sawbridgeworth.
Thank you. And also this gentleman. Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. Well, we will then begin. If we could have our Senior Licensing and Enforcement Officer to present his report.
Thank you, Chair. As you've already stated, we're here today to determine an application to vary the premises licence for the Old Bell, 38 Bell Street, Sawbridgeworth. The application sought to add the sale of alcohol to an outside area of the premises until 2300 every evening. The hours and activity requested are shown at paragraph 3.2 of the report. During the 28-day statutory public consultation, one representation was received against the application from two local residents who are husband and wife residing at the same property. The representation suggests that the granting of the application as requested would undermine the licensing objective of the prevention of public nuisance. The representation gives details of a planning application, but as members are aware, this is a separate regime, so planning matters are not relevant consideration for this application. The Section 182 guidance suggests that planning and licensing should, where there are simultaneous applications, discuss what hours might be considered acceptable. These discussions took place at an officer level, and planning's response is at paragraph 3.23 of the report. This does not fetter planning's discretion to grant something differently. It's just an advisory about what will be proposed. On the 2nd of April 2024, the applicant's representative emailed the licensing authority a letter to forward to the interested parties. In this letter, the applicant's representative offered 4 additional conditions to help mitigate the interested parties' concerns. These conditions were: the external bar survey will close at 10:30 on any day. When in use, the external bar will be constantly supervised. When not in use, all alcohol sold from the external bar will be secured so that it is not accessible to members of the public. And the 4th is a garden management plan will be drawn up and implemented at the premises. A copy of the plan will be made available to responsible authorities upon request. This letter was forwarded to the interested parties, who confirmed that the above conditions did not mitigate their concerns about the application. The members of the licensing subcommittee requested a site visit so that they could better understand the layout of the premises and the proximity of the interested parties' property. This visit took place on the 4th of April in line with the council's established protocol to ensure fairness. During the visits, members asked for 2 photographs of the inside of the marquee area to be taken so that they could be referenced at this hearing. These have been circulated to all parties, and I have hard copies today if necessary. On Friday the 5th and Saturday the 6th of April, the interested parties sent in some photographs that had been taken, but due to the tight timescales, these could not be circulated to all parties. Therefore, the permission of all parties present must be sought before this additional information can be introduced today. Thank you, Chair. I believe that summarises the application and the report, but I'm happy to try and answer any questions if there are any.
In relation to the report at this stage? I
That's
presume?
correct.
Yes, no questions at this stage, albeit I will obviously have maybe some questions about the photos in due course when we get there. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other responsible authorities present? No. And any other parties, sir? Thank you then. It's just questions for the moment, and then we'll move on for.
Chair.
Yeah, excuse me, Mr. O'Leary, just at the moment, it's just questions relating to the report, and then we'll move on to statements afterwards. The report that our officer has just made, so his summary that he's done. The other item, please, sir, is the microphone in front of you. Is the little red light showing? Okay, if you can just make sure that is switched on when you wish to speak and turned off soon afterwards, that would be a great help. No, the little one at the bottom of the microphone. If you need some assistance, my colleague here is rushing around to make sure. They take some getting used to, I promise. Yeah. So at this present point, just to clarify, only at this point is any questions you might have with regard to what has been stated in our licensing officer's report.
The report I received called on an extract from the rules of procedure for meeting with licensing subcommittee. Is that
The report that's just been read out by Officer Rawlings,
well? He gave a summary.
a summary report.
Yes.
Yes.
I tried to amplify. I felt our position wasn't ideally correct as we saw it anyway, as we see it.
Is
But
there a
that
specific question relating to what has been raised at present? You will get an opportunity to voice your
Well, the
concerns.
specific question was, had they the people investigating this spoken to the environmental people? And was that after those environmental people had received two emails on this occasion? They now have 5 reports from the sound consultant we have employed.
Right.
The consultant, whatever, environmental consultants. We obviously didn't, we wanted to know, have they actually spoken to the various other officers in the other disciplines, if you want to call them that, when had they done that, and was that after we had advised the chief of planning and building control of our experts' views on the matter?
Right, thank you. We've noted those questions and we'll approach them one at a time. If I could ask you for the moment to switch your microphone off.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Oops.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to the question about contacting environmental health.
Thank
Obviously,
you.
they're part of the statutory consultation, so they had 28 days to consider the application. It wouldn't be for the licensing authority to then try and pursue or elicit a representation from another responsible authority. So if they considered they had concerns, then they would have made representation, but they've chosen not to. So we haven't approached them since.
Thank you very much. So those have been recorded. We are aware of them, but as you've just heard from our officer, he's had no representation back from the mandatory consultees. Thank you.
Chair, it may be appropriate at this stage also to discuss the new evidence that Mr. O'Leary has submitted on Friday and Saturday.
Thank you. Yes. I believe we had some further evidence submitted at the end of last week. There are stringent limitations on what evidence, when it is submitted and whether it is permissible. Would our licensing officer, I believe, had that submitted to him? Could you just check and see and confirm what that actually covers? Is it photographic or auditory?
So I think if we ask Mr. O'Leary whether he wants to submit it first, and then I can describe it to you, but we obviously need to have the other party's permission to put it in.
Thank you. Mr. O'Leary,
Yes.
do you wish to submit these items?
Yes, I didn't realise they had to go through the formality. I thought sending them in an email to the relevant officer would be enough.
Okay, thank you very
Okay.
much then. If you could just switch your microphone off again, thank you. May I address then? Yes,
Can I just address you on that then? So our policy is that any new evidence has to be submitted 2 working days in advance of any hearing taking place. So that hasn't been done. It may be appropriate to let the applicant see a copy of it and then for them to make representations. So if that is then served now and then you have a quick adjournment for them to consider it, would be my advice on that. And then they can come back and make representations and then a determination for you as to whether it should be submitted or not.
thank you very much. Yes, so as yet, this additional evidence has not been submitted to you. If we provide that to you, we'll take a brief adjournment for you to consider it. Thank you very much.
So you
Chair, it would be appropriate to adjourn for about 10 minutes to allow the applicant time to consider.
Yes, do we have a proposer to an accept adjournment? Seconder for that?
I second that.
Thank you. I propose then we have an adjournment for 10 minutes whilst you consider this evidence and then we'll decide further. Thank you. Were we ready to proceed? Right. Thank you very much. Have you had due time to consider the additional submitted evidence?
Yes, Chair, and we have no objection to these being submitted for the purposes of this hearing. And I'll just make some submissions on it during my presentation if that suits.
All right, if you'll just bear with us for a moment.
So Chair, on that
Has been submitted
basis,
to us.
that evidence needs to be, all three members need to see this evidence now. We can email that over to you. Or would you like paper copies?
I'd prefer a paper one if you have it available.
Okay,
Yourselves? Well, possibly paper might be the quickest, but if you have an email option.
so Chair, whilst you're considering that, we can either adjourn again for you to consider that evidence, or we can continue with Mr. O'Leary, as and when it comes to his time to make representations to address you on that, and then the applicant to respond.
Thank you. My colleagues, are you willing to consider it here, or do you need to further adjournment?
I'm happy to consider it here.
All right, thank you. We'll consider it here. Thank you.
Okay, you may proceed.
Thank you. We have looked at and considered this, and we'll bear it in mind, and thank you for your offering submission and accepting. We need to move forward now for the applicant to make your submission, and then we will move forward to others that are required. So if I can invite you to do so, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and I won't repeat what is in a very comprehensive and well-structured report, and thank you very much to Mr. Rawlings for that, and obviously the observations that are very useful. I will refer to a few of the paragraphs as we go through, just as a reminder of those that I think are particularly relevant. The application summary is at paragraphs 3.1 to 3.2 at page 13 of the report, and that's been amended by a letter that we submitted through Mr. Rawlings to Mr. O'Leary, dated the 2nd of April, which I hope you've had a copy of. So the application effectively is to allow us to use a mobile bar within the external space, and so we're licensing the space for those purposes. We have considered what Mr. O'Leary had to say, and off the back of that, you'll see in our letter we have proposed 4 amendments to the application by way of conditions. So the external bar to close at 22:30 at the latest outside, constantly supervised when in use, all alcohol to be secured when not in use, and a garden management plan to be drawn up and implemented. So those actually go, we suggest, to the heart of the issues that have been raised. you'll also note there is a condition already on the premises license about the garden having to close, and that's at page 48 of your papers. So there is already some restriction on the garden, but I would remind this committee and the legal officer as well that this is simply an application to add something to the license. It's not a review of the license, and therefore things cannot be taken away from it. And case law, as I'm sure your legal officer would advise you on, is Taylor versus Manchester, which is sort of very clear on not removing things that are already there when we're not in a review process. But I think it's worth mentioning, and especially with Mr. O'Leary here as well, just so he's aware of what this committee can and can't do. The points I'd like to draw out from the officer report at paragraph 3.25, there are no details and no evidence of the disturbances experienced. And the reason I mention this is disturbance is not a licensing objective. The objective we're talking about here is prevention of public nuisance, and public nuisance has a legal definition, and it's not the same as disturbance. One house experiencing a disturbance, for instance, may only give rise at the top of the threshold to a private nuisance, which again is not a licensing matter. We have to think about public nuisance, which is the community being affected by the source of issue. And so it's worth just having in the back of our minds that a nuisance is not itself something that can be legislated against. We all experience nuisances of one kind or another. I live next to an A road and have some students living next door to me, but they're perfectly entitled to live there, and I can't shut down the road. So, you know, we all have to bear these things where we live, and what we're talking about here is public nuisance and whether we meet that threshold, or whether this application would meet that threshold. My submissions, you won't be surprised to hear, will be this application wouldn't meet any threshold near undermining the licensing objective of prevention of public nuisance. Paragraph 9.43 is referenced in Mr. Rawlings' report that your determination must be evidence-based. That's at page 81 of the guidance itself. And again, where you see here that there is no representation from the Environmental Protection Officer, and indeed there is a dialogue the officer has had in the past, communications from the interested party here, but has chosen not to make a representation. I'm going to ask that you give that significant weight in your deliberations. And when I come to summing up, I'll point out a few other parts of the guidance that are relevant to that. One of the questions that came up at paragraph 3.29, and it's a valid question, I think probably one that you had in your minds when you visited the premises, is where in fact are we going to put this bar? The idea is, rather than building a permanent bar outside, which would be one option, is to have a flexible mobile bar that can be moved around within the canopied space. So we're not talking about putting it down the far end of the garden near the property of the interested party. We're only talking about having it within the canopy, but to have a bit of flexibility to be able to move it within that canopy, so we can lay out tables and chairs in certain ways depending on if there are larger bookings or the way things work. So that's the idea, is to have a bit of flexibility for the bar under that canopy area. Now, you've seen on the plan at paragraph 43, at page 43, that we're licensing the whole garden area is within the red line. The truth of the matter is actually it's only under the canopy that is where we're going to put this bar. And I just wanted to make that clear, as I thought it was an important point for you to note. It's worth just reflecting on the experience of operators around the country in using mobile and external bars. It was something that obviously got used a lot more during COVID, when we were all outside having to do everything outside. But actually, even before COVID, there was a big move pubs with big gardens to put external provision there for a couple of reasons. One, it meant that you stopped having pinch points around doorways, people bringing trays of glasses, etc., in and out, if there was a mobile provision outside or a permanent provision in the garden. Secondly, it creates a point of constant supervision. So if you have a bar open outside, there has to be someone manning that bar, and that person then is overlooking what's going on in terms of customers outside. So one has actually the promotion of two of the licensing objectives in putting in outside bars. And we have a number of years, and I work for a firm, we act for a number of very large pub companies. We've done applications throughout the country at pretty much every local authority. And where there are external bars, I can say that we've never had any issues of an external bar being the cause of complaints for noise nuisance or issues. Now, obviously, some gardens do cause noise nuisance and issues, and you will no doubt be aware of this as councillors sitting on this committee. But the bar itself, which is what we're talking about here today, tends to promote the licensing objectives where they are used for the reasons I've set out. There is no evidence that the current use of the garden undermines the licensing objectives, and I think I've made that point, so I won't labour it anymore. The garden management plan that we've added as a condition as well will actually codify good practices, assist staff in understanding how to proactively manage the garden. Indeed, a lot of it has been done already, but it does help, and that's why we've offered that condition. So new staff, for instance, there is something they can refer to as they get used to what's expected of them from the very high standards that are set by Darren and his staff at the premises. So in summary, my submissions are simply this, but the application I'm going to ask you to grant as amended by the letter with the 4 conditions for the reasons I've set out. The photos and the evidence we have, just very quickly to touch on this from our observations point of view, so you have our comments. Maybe I have a few questions of the interested party later just about this, but we'll see what's said. The photos show the car park and actually show quite usefully this second photo with the beautiful blue sky, quite how far the canopy is away from the residence property. And indeed, these decibel levels for what they are worth, I don't know what they were recorded on. We don't know how they were set up. So from an evidential point of view, actually, it's very difficult to give much weight to a figure like this. As you all know, environmental health officers, if they were going to test for a statutory noise nuisance, for instance, won't use a noise decibel meter. They will listen. They will decide if there is a disturbance that undermines the statute that they're referring to, and then they will take action. These meters are sort of notoriously difficult, but that 64 decibels is not a high level if we were to take it on face value, and 92 decibels inside the canopy shows the difference in dissipation between one and the other, and that isn't a particularly high level for a very busy premises where there's lots of people enjoying themselves. The other photo here, given I've not had breakfast, I thought it was very unfair to put tables of food in front of me, especially as these are charcuterie boards from Let It Brie, who are very, very good at providing very high-end charcuterie. So that gives you a very good indication of what actually happens under the canopy, if you like, with guests at the premises. So I don't really have very much more to say about those questions. And at that point, I would perhaps have a couple of comments on summing up at the end, if I were permitted, just to do with the law. But as it stands, I'd invite any questions at this stage from you and your colleagues, Chair.
Thank you for that. Just bear with us for a moment. If I could invite our interested party, Mr. O'Leary, if you have. Bear with me a moment, I jumped the gun. Apologies. Okay, my colleague has some questions he'd like to
Morning. Thank you
offer.
for that.
Thank you.
I was just interested in the garden management plan, and I wondered if I could ask for some clarity on that, what kind of things that might involve and what kind of actions might be taken under that. Thank you.
Yes, so the garden management plan, we haven't provided a copy because quite simply we'd be jumping the gun to have one here before you, as we don't know what you're going to return. But we have bandied around a couple of draft versions and in anticipation of various events. But what they do have in common is staff measures on dealing with customers that might be getting a bit loud, a bit boisterous, or undertaking activities which are not permitted. So for instance, ball games at the far end of the garden, if there were things like that going on where they're not allowed, staff would be proactively required to manage those things that aren't allowed. It's also then about dealing with the outside bar where this to be granted, making sure it's fully supervised, properly manned, glasses are collected, taken inside, and then management tools if management needs to come out to sort out any issues. We would also expect it to include a part about complaints. So if any neighbours complained, to come in. Yeah. Sorry, and yes, in very busy times, a full-time garden supervisor. So at times where actually, you'll appreciate this, you know, everyone either wants to be outside or indoors. It's never fully put throughout everything. So where it's necessary, because it is very busy outside, there would be a full-time supervision of the garden.
Thank you for that. I have a couple of questions myself here. One of the items is with regard to use of that management, and would it normally be expected there will be one or more members of staff managing that location? And if it is only one, what would the fallback system be in order to be able to get assistance if needed? How would they communicate that without leaving the bar unmanaged?
So there will be someone who would permanently manage the bar, but also bear in mind on busy times, actually there'll be staff all the time in and out because it's, you know, there's lots of food, etc. So there is always staff in and out and people around the premises. So to say just one person behind the bar would be the provision that it doesn't kind of deal with the logistics of operating a large pub with a significantly busy garden. So there are significant numbers of staff around. So the garden management plan effectively helps with the coordination of that. There is then management oversight above that as well. And the supervisor and obviously the one person supervising the external area separately as part of the plan. So the idea is to flex staff as and when they're needed and where they are needed. But the bar would have to be manned permanently as per the condition, and there would be additional supervision outside.
Thank you for that. Further to the mobility or the intended type of mobile bar, is it envisaged that this, should it be granted, would be something that is manually repositionable, or is it something that would be easily wheeled around? And would it therefore, if that was to be the case, predominantly be in a specific position, although you have mentioned that it might on occasions be relocated?
Yes, so it's on wheels. It's fully on wheels, so it can be wheeled in and out, and then it can be locked away and stored away so that there is no access to it. It's envisaged that there will probably be a primary position where it works in the ordinary setup of things, but it's to give a bit of flexibility if there were to be a different kind of event where actually it would be better placed elsewhere just for the logistics of it. But it's always going to be under that canopy. There's no intention of moving the bar down the far end of the garden past the car park that way.
Is there likely to be a predominant location should this be provided?
Are you suggesting something we can mark on the plan as a prominent location, or just in general terms? Because in general terms, yes. I mean, Darren could probably tell you where it is better.
Yeah, there will be a predominant location. The best way to describe it is if you were coming out of the back of the pub itself and you were approaching the tent in front of you, you have the gate to your left, which takes you out to the roadway, and on the right hand side, between the just where the canopy starts on the right hand side and the back of the kitchen area, that's where we would locate the bar usually. And I would suggest we would only move it somewhere else in the event that, I'm making it up for argument's sake, we were hosting a wake and there was a specific request to have seating in a certain place that took that space up, we would then perhaps move the bar somewhere else.
Thank you. And does this bar unit that you're proposing require additional power and lighting? Would that restrict its locations?
It requires power, but we have full power within the tented area.
That is the locations on the canopy, posts, etc.
Yes.
At present.
Yes.
Thank you. with regard to the overall premises, at the far end of the garden area where there is a raised unofficial seating area that I'm led to understand is used particularly when the weather is nice and is close to our interested party's property. I noticed that the boundary currently is not maintained. Would that be something that you would, although not a licensable item, intend to restore to ensure that you have control of your premises rather than access and egress by other parties?
In term, well, one of the things we were discussing earlier is as you, that there is a public right of way right down the side of the premise.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. If I can just allow, I will come to you, sir. Thank you for your patience. If you could just continue.
We understand that there is a public right of way that runs all the way down the length of that side of the property and out the back gate. That is our understanding of matters. Now, if there's any issues around that, that's obviously not for this licensing committee. We will happily take that up, and I will report that back to my client, who are the landowners, and we'll look into that with their property team. So we're happy to do that. In terms of any upkeep of the garden, it's part of the obligation is to upkeep the premises. If there was anything particularly that was of concern, then that would obviously be looked at. Again, I think for the record, it's outside of the scope of this licensing committee. But yes, I mean, you'll have noticed from visiting the premises that there is it's rigorous standards kept for the premises in general and for the way it operates. So we would expect those standards to be maintained. And Darren would absolutely.
Thank you. That was purely to understand fully the scope and the likely potential impact. And there is one other item which is within your premises area. Before the main car park opens out, there is a small area that appears to be slightly raised and appears may have been for public performance type purposes. Is that correct or?
No, that was about, time travels too fast, but perhaps 2 years ago, we had an outside catering offer, and that was a hard standing to put the unit on, which is clearly no longer there, and is no longer used for anything now.
Right, thank you very much. Just one other item for clarity. Your route across the back garden area, how is that controlled? Is it open at all times? At the far end of the car park and the grassed area, there is a gate that accesses the footpath. What's the structure of control, or is there any, as far as your premises are concerned?
So the back gate is always available. It was my understanding as the leaseholder that there was indeed a right of access, and that we were not even supposed to lock the front gate to secure our own equipment, which means that we then have had to be locking the pavilion up independently. I would be delighted to find out that there was actually not a public right of access. So therefore, to answer your question, no, that there hasn't been any process of locking gates and things like that, because we did not believe we were allowed to.
Thank you for that. So in summary, my understanding is that you are intending only to use this potential mobile facility within the current canopied area and have no intention of using it outside of that area, even though its permanent position, should it be given, would be predominantly close to the pub, not further away where it could cause potential impact outside. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so if you look at the plan on page 43, it is the point that's almost furthest from the residence point within the canopy area. So yeah, diagonally across the garden and away and nearest to the pub.
My colleague has a further question for you.
Thank you. Is there a reason then why you're applying for the entire area rather than just the canopy area?
There has been some debate about this, and indeed, if you were minded to restrict it to just the canopy area, so on the plan itself, effectively the area south of the car park, I don't think anyone would be overly upset about that. Obviously, sometimes from a pubco point of view, from the applicant's point of view, it's useful to license the whole garden because you may want to do activities that could be used, but that's not the key purpose of this application before you today. I would remind you, of course, that there is no evidence to suggest that you couldn't license the whole thing if you were minded, but you know, to be open and transparent, we've tried to be very open and transparent where we're doing things and what we want to do.
Further question?
Thank you. I can appreciate that the bar itself is not likely to cause a nuisance, but I'm wondering it's the impact of having an additional bar outside. So you're saying it's going to reduce pinch points. Could a consequence be that you'll actually have more customers because it's more accessible, and how you propose to manage the potential nuisance from more customers?
It's a good question, but there is quite a simple answer to it. It won't attract more customers. The bar itself is a small mobile bar. It's not a full facility. You won't get everything on it anyway. So if you want other drinks, you'd have to go inside. It simply does actually alleviate the need for people who want whatever products are on there to go inside. And it was a point I made earlier to, I think, something Councillor Townsend said. The reality of operating a pub like this is, on a nice day, everyone's outside. When the weather's rubbish, like it's been, well, today's different, but for most of spring already, most people want to be inside. It's not simply, it doesn't work logistically to say simply putting this bar here will increase the number of customers outside. If they want to be outside, they'll be outside and use a bar facility inside, irrespective, or use waiter and waitress service or the other facilities that are there. So it's to facilitate what would be there anyway. It's easier, and it gives that point of management as well. So that constant supervision, which actually, you know, I'm 50 this year, but I do remember the days when knowing that the bar person was looking over my activities might restrain me from getting a bit more loud and boisterous than I would otherwise. And in a pub garden with that constant supervision, you have the same supervision as you do inside the pub.
Thank you for that. If there's no other questions from the panel, may I invite then Mr. O'Leary as our interested party for any questions you have, sir. Oh, excuse me, sir. Could I ask you to thank you very much.
Sorry, I'm not used to this. I'm not sure if he said he was told by the leaseholder that was the position, or he, as the leaseholder, because he is a leaseholder, that was his understanding. Because I've looked at the agreement, which I understand is for the lease. Well, it's the only one in the relevant documents that are in the land office or whatever. And I saw no mention of a right of way in that document at all.
The simple answer is, with respect to the question, I don't think it's relevant for today's hearing. It's something that obviously, if there is a query, can be taken up with Admiral directly. I'm here as a licensing solicitor, so I'm telling you what I've been instructed from today, not that I've looked at any of the documents myself. So I think that's probably something with respect for outside of the remit of this committee for us to pick up.
I wasn't aware whether you were actually working for the owner or the admiral, or you were actually working for the leaseholder.
With
or
due,
both.
with due respect, if I could ask both parties, as you are endeavouring to do so through the chair, it would be a great
Yes.
help. Also, that helps for understanding of anyone that's also watching the webcast. So much appreciated. Do you have other questions that are relevant to this, directly relevant to this application?
No, I don't think I have any more questions. I've made the comments I have already made to the various officers, and I'm assuming they've been passed on. So I have nothing to add to those.
Thank you then for that. We have that information to hand and will be considered where it's relevant.
Chair, would you like Mr O'Leary to address you on the new evidence that was submitted then?
That's most helpful. Thank you. Do you wish to address us further on the new evidence that you've submitted to us that has been accepted as admissible by all parties?
The photographs.
There were some questions raised with regard to those. If you have any responses or any other items you want to include.
Yes, I mean, obviously the sound levels are horrendous. These were actually done by my son, who's a doctor, and he took them. They cause an enormous amount of disturbance. I mean, quite frankly, we had one weekend a few years ago where we actually started ringing out local hotels to find a night for the bed for the night, because it was just totally impossible living in the house. And I don't think I think there's a great respect. We have invited the head of planning to come and visit the property, but they've declined.
Thank you. I've noted that item. Is there anything further?
No, the photographs merely indicate the sound levels and the occupancy. What we were concerned about was that the photographs that when you visited the property you were given were not sort of really representative. I'm not saying intentionally, they were ones that are available, presumably, but they rather looked like the ones that we used when the premises first opened and to try and get approval, because everything was done after the event. Approval was always on something that had already been done, which has been the problem all through. We just felt, you know, I couldn't really recognize it, frankly. I've said this in the email to the officers concerned and said, look, it took me a while to work out this was the same place. I don't know if you looked at it yourselves, it may well have been just like that. I'm not saying otherwise. Some of the photographs, one of the photographs I've got showing how crowded it can actually be. And that's without dancing going on. When we've got people bopping to music as well, they are generally speaking in that space between the two sort of set of seat, one side and the other side. But I think this photograph just should give you some idea. This wasn't by way the most crowded or the worst, but the noise levels were 92 dB, and they were measured on an iPhone with an iPhone application, which has very high ratings, but which the environmental people don't feel they can accept as such because it's not registered and it's not certified, and it's not done by them.
Thank you for that. Has already been mentioned with regard to sound levels, the environmental health team will be required to be the authority that discuss and consider anything that relates to that. As this as such is not a planning matter, I can't make comment with regard to planning, but is there anything further that relates directly, in your opinion, to the licensing adjustment? Because this isn't a variation, it's a consideration for an adjustment that we need to bear in mind before we move forward.
Well, as I say, we have employed a sound consultant on that score, and that sound consultant has produced some reports which have been given to, I hope, the environmental people. Because of the nature of the reports, they're extremely critical, extremely critical. They were given only to the head of planning and building control and left to her to decide how to distribute them. That was a deliberate policy.
Thank you for that. Just bear with me a moment. Thank you. Just taking some confirmation there. Are there any further representations other than those you've already mentioned that you need to bring to our attention?
No, I don't think so. Obviously, we are concerned that the licensing may in itself contribute to the problems we've had for 9 years, 10 years, going on 10 years. We have sent in all sorts of reports. We've got 3 lever arch files, solid, that thick, of reports, photographs not acceptable, because then they don't actually show people drinking out of ours. Sworn statements saying they were drinking out of ours are not accepted. Photographs show 30, 40 people in the canopy area after the time it was supposed to be closed altogether. And we've been told they're probably vaping. I've never seen 70 people together vaping, but it must be quite a sight. Also, smoking is not allowed in the canopy area, as far as I understand. And people have always gone outside. We've been told that's what all those people we're observing after 11 o'clock. That situation's improved. It's taken 9.5 years to get some compliance. And that's not this leaseholder. There have been, I think, 3 leaseholders in that time. It's certainly 2 or 3. But there has been this major problem about compliance with that.
Thank you for your comments. They are noted. I need to move forward now if you have no further questions. Are there any questions or responses from any of our licensing or legal officers? I have a colleague that wishes to also raise a question. Okay. Excuse me, sir. Thank you for your patience while I just confirmed a couple of items. We now need to ask if you have any further submissions? Firstly, from the applicant.
No, no, so the other party.
Oh. We're just checking on policy to ensure everyone has due consideration and opportunity. Thank you for your patience. Right, we are now at item 5 on the agenda, and therefore it is now open for Mr. O'Leary to make any further submissions. If he has other questions, we now have a submission rather than just questions. So if there's anything further you wish to address, sir.
No, I believe, including what we have submitted to the various officers, we have made our position fairly clear, I think.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any other questions to be made by other parties with regard to what's been discussed? Have you any questions for Mr. O'Leary?
No, no questions. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Leary, thank you for your submission. Can you give us a little bit more information about your concerns, about what you experienced? Is it times of day, days of the week, and how close do the disturbances get to your boundary, please?
Well, we had a separate problem about talking about control of the boundary, as your colleague was talking about before, with children kicking footballs into our garden. And our garden is very limited. It's actually almost a courtyard between the preservation wall, which we specially had done for conservation reasons of our own. We chose to do it as it's a conservation area, and the house. And this results in us being totally unable to use the garden, the back garden at all. It's not like a big garden and it just comes in at the end. This actually sort of knocks you out if a football comes over the wall. And that has been a major problem, as well as the noise. The noise problem is, that's in essence, it's noise and those footballs being kicked over the wall. The noise problem, as I say, the biggest problem is to be able to convince anybody that we have a serious problem when we know we have a serious problem. We can't, my wife has to sleep with the window open, and we've read all the rights one has and nuisance and all these aspects of things, and we're entitled to do that. And basically it means our double bedroom back is totally unusable. Frankly, we can't have our grandchildren come and visit because we need the extra bedroom for them, and it's just impossible. So it's very, very difficult situation. And it is, generally speaking, much worse for weekends. Not so much Sunday normally, although they've started to run parties on Sunday now, so that's got a bit noisy. But it used to be Friday, Saturday. Friday, I always say, is the people who were getting off work and having a drink to celebrate the end of the week, probably. The children kicking the footballs was generally worse on those days, because in the summer they bring their wife and children with them, and the children really have got nothing to do, and they're just left totally unsupervised in the garden. And that ended up with the kicking of footballs. So that has been a major problem. We have spoken to the police. We've done all sorts of things to try and sort that out and bring it to people's attention. But the other is just the noise. The noise is the principal issue, and we wouldn't, obviously, we were concerned that any form of change in the license might make it worse. That is obviously our motive, if you like, in bringing up this question is, will whatever you agree to as being the new license make matters worse?
Thank you. Does that answer your question? Anything further? Just a moment, we will have an opportunity if you have any further questions, both for our interested party or otherwise. My colleague's just checking her list of things that have come up. Thank you. All right. Okay. Do you therefore have any further questions for our colleague here?
No, thank you. I'll save my observations for my summing up if
Thank
that's
you.
easier.
Yes. Any questions for Mr. O'Leary from our officers and representatives? No? Okay. We now have reached the item number 6. So any parties that wish to make their closing statements. First, we invite interested parties. So Mr. O'Leary, if you have any summing up or closing statements you'd like to make, sir.
Well, I think I've made the point. The only overall factor, which again we were assumed that any change in the license would be compatible with, is the fact that we are in the back garden of Grade 2 listed property in a conservation area, and it has deteriorated quite significantly over the last 10 years, certainly, and in the last 2 or 3 particularly. But that is for the conservation people, obviously, to comment on and say. But that is a factor that affects us because, you know, our house is on it and in it in the conservation area. So I would merely say that this is a factor, we thought, and we wouldn't like the licensing in any way to contribute to that reduction in the value of the conservation area. And no, I think I've mentioned the main things, which were the noise and the kicking of footballs over the wall.
Thank you very much for your consideration, your contribution. I will also now invite, we don't have any other responsible authorities here. If I can pass this over then to our applicant for your summing up, sir.
Thank you very much. It's more just a couple of observations, I think, about what we've heard today. So the first thing we have to bear in mind is that this is an application about putting a bar outside into the external area. With respect to what we've heard today, in terms of any music or anything like that, that's not part of this application. There are processes in place, and you've already heard, obviously, from Mr. O'Leary that he's clearly had significant liaison with officers about this. So the officers are aware of his concerns, which obviously needs to be taken into account the fact that they've chosen not to make any representations here. I'm going to ask you to give significant weight, and the guidance actually makes it clear that that's something you should do. Each responsible authority is an expert in their field and the primary source of information on those areas of expertise. So that's a paragraph 9.12 of the guidance, as I'm sure your legal officer is aware. The reason I mention that, of course, is that sometimes it's been observed that officers may not know about things that are going on and therefore may not have all the information. I think in this case, it's very clear they do know what's going on and have all the information and yet chose not to make representations here. And that could just be about what one person perceives to be a disturbance or something that's unreasonable versus what the legal test that we have to apply here, which is the prevention of public nuisance. But leaving all that aside, we're talking about putting a bar under a canopy in the premises. you may be aware, planning isn't relevant here, but you'll have seen in your report and in your officer's report, he spoke and liaised with the planning officer, and he mentioned planning conditions that actually require things like music to be turned off outside at 9 p.m, etc. So there are other control mechanisms, which again, as your legal advisor, no, there shouldn't be duplication necessarily of the different legal tests where they apply to one, you don't have to apply it to the other. This is very independent. The additional conditions, I'd say, promote the licensing objectives, along with the positioning of a bar outside, which in and of itself, I say, promotes the licensing objectives. The reasons I've gone into, so I don't need to go through them again, but the conditions actually have additional benefits outside of just simply when the bar's in place in terms of the garden management plan, for instance. So you are getting something for the grant where you mind it to grant as well that goes slightly beyond that which we're simply asking for. So on that basis, I'm going to ask you respectfully, please, to grant the application as submitted as amended by the 4 conditions that you've had before you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have one question I'd like to ask you. Were this to be granted, would you as applicants seriously consider further contribution and input from interested parties to your garden management plan? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't. There's 2 parts to the answer. One is if there are legitimate concerns relating to the management of the garden. Of course, those can be taken into account, and indeed, complaints can be logged and those can be managed and tested against officers coming out to see what's going on. A formal input into a garden management plan, I think, creates a number of issues. One of which is what happens if there is no formal agreement, because we simply disagree as to what should be in there and what shouldn't, what's responsible, what's not, what's proportionate and what's not. And then there needs to be a mechanism put in place for that. And I think that the legal test there would be actually that makes it an unenforceable condition for the difficulty of what happens if, because obviously they have to be clear, recognizable and enforceable. So the garden management plan, where we put it in place, it's available to officers if they wish to come and have a look at it. If there is input that's needed from Mr. O'Leary or any other parties, then that can be taken into account. And ultimately, if we decide or determine that we're not going to do something that someone may have asked for, there is a mechanism of review by which we can all come back and actually have a look and see whether it was reasonable or not, with evidence in front of us. But I'd suggest, Councillor Townsend, at this stage, having a formal input process from an external party actually probably makes it much more difficult to enforce that condition.
Thank you very much for that response. We have now reached a point where questions have been asked, responses given, and thank you for your representations and your summaries. We need now to retire and deliberate on what we've heard, and then return with our decision with regard to the application that's before us. So thank you for all your input, and now we will retire outside of the chamber and respond as soon as it's right to do so. Thank you very much. Yes. The licensing subcommittee have considered the application for a variation of the premises licence for the Old Bell, 38 Bell Street, Sawbridgeworth, Hertfordshire, CM 219AN. Item 24/0207/PLV. And read and listened to the comments of the Services Manager for Licensing and Enforcement and the oral and written presentations from the applicant and interested party. In determination this matter, the subcommittee have decided to grant the application for the variation of the licence to include the external area of the premises, to allow the use of a mobile bar in the external area, but only to the extent of the first drinking area adjacent to the public house, as shown within the plan now outlined in yellow, which will be attached to the decision notice. The subcommittee also accepts the 4 conditions offered up by the applicant as follows. Item 1, the external bar servery will close by 22:30 hours on any day. Number 2, when in use, the external bar will be constantly supervised. Number 3, when not in use, all alcohol sold from the external bar will be secured so that it is not accessible to members of the public. And item 4, a garden management plan will be drawn up and implemented at the premises. A copy of the plan will be made available to the responsible authorities on request. In coming to this decision, the subcommittee is mindful to strike a healthy balance between the interests of the interested party and supporting the local economy. Members were mindful of the concerns addressed by the interested party, but noted that the representations regarding the public nuisance, licensing objective and the planning considerations made were not supported by any responsible authorities. Whilst members are mindful of the proximity of the premises to the interested party, members have also considered the clear representations made by the applicant today, which confirms that the use of the mobile bar will be solely limited to the current canopy area only. The condition to limit the licensed area is based on the applicant's submissions and that there is no scope at present to extend the use of the mobile bar beyond this boundary that we are licensing today. This decision will be sent to you in writing and there is a right of appeal within 21 days to the Magistrates' Court. Now we move on to any urgent business. As there is no further urgent business, that concludes the agenda today. I declare the meeting closed at 12:20. Thank you.